There are moments when you trust the doctors completely. And then there are moments when something inside you just says, I cannot continue like this. Lucas was surrounded by brilliant doctors, experienced nurses, and machines designed to keep him alive. But the very thing helping him breathe was also causing him harm. And eventually I realized that someone had to say what no one else was saying. Something had to change. Not long after the bells brought Lucas a small moment of joy, he found another way to communicate his discomfort. He began pulling out his breathing tube. At first, it happened once, but then it happened again. And then it was consistent again and again. And each time the same terrifying sequence followed. Lucas would grab the tube, pull it out. The alarms would begin sounding and Lucas would stop breathing. The medical team would rush towards his bed and the doctors would have to place the tube back into Lucas's airway. Every time it happened, my heart just stopped. I knew the doctors were doing everything that they could, but we were trapped in a cycle that was becoming more dangerous than every emergency itself. The breathing tube was keeping Lucas alive, but it was also irritating and damaging his airway. Granuloma tissue had begun forming around the tube in his throat. And that meant when Lucas pulled the tube out, the swollen tissue could block his airway and prevent him from breathing on his own. So we were caught in an impossible situation. He needed the tube to breathe, but the tube was also creating the very problem that made it impossible for him to breathe without it. There was no easy answer, and there was no safe way to continue doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. The doctors caring for Lucas were skilled, dedicated, and compassionate. I trusted them. But as the emergencies continued, my maternal instinct became impossible to ignore. I kept thinking, this is not sustainable. Lucas could not live in a constant state of crisis. He could not continue pulling out the tube, losing his airway, and being intubated yet again. Something had to change. I wasn't a doctor. I didn't have the medical training. But I knew my child, and I knew that the current plan was not working. I finally gathered the courage to speak up. My heart was pounding. My voice was firm. We need to fix this problem, I told the doctor. We cannot keep intubating him over and over again. There has to be another way. I knew that tracheostomies existed. A tracheostomy would create more secure airway through a small opening in Lucas's neck. It was not a simple solution, and it would require another surgery. It would require me to train how to take care of him, and it would change our lives dramatically. But it could also give Lucas something that he desperately needed, and that was stability. I didn't know whether a tracheostomy was the right answer, but I knew that we needed to consider it. And I knew Lucas needed someone to ask the question on his behalf. My plea opened the doors to a different conversation. The medical team began looking beyond the repeated intubation and considered another approach. After carefully reviewing Lucas's conditions, the doctors agreed that a tracheostomy could provide the secure airway that he needed. So instead of having a long tube pass through his mouth and throat, Lucas would breathe through a small opening in his neck. The trach would be hard for him to pull out. It would reduce the repeated damage to his throat, And most importantly, it could prevent the constant respiratory emergencies that had become part of our daily lives. So for the first time, it felt as though we were moving towards a solution instead of simply reacting to another crisis. The decision was not made lightly. A tracheostomy meant surgery, another surgery, and Lucas had already had many surgeries. It meant learning how to care for the trach. It meant suctioning, cleaning, monitoring, and always being prepared for another emergency. It also meant facing questions no one could answer. Could the trach be temporary? Would Lucas need it for a month? Would he need it for years? We didn't know. Nobody knew. But we did know one thing. The current situation was putting him at risk. A trach offered him the possibility of a safer and more stable way to breathe. And if it could give Lucas a better quality of life, then I was prepared to face whatever came with it. I stood beside Lucas and looked down at this tiny baby. He was still so small and so vulnerable, and yet he had already survived more than most people face in a lifetime. Lucas had proven again and again that he was a fighter. Now, it was my turn to fight for him, not by performing a medical procedure, not by having all the answers, but by refusing to remain silent when I knew something was wrong. Being his mother meant more than comforting him and holding his hand. It meant asking difficult questions. It meant challenging the current plan when it was no longer working. And it meant making sure that his voice was heard even when he couldn't speak for himself. That day, I learned something that would carry me through Lucas's journeys. Doctors bring medical knowledge. Nurses bring experience and care. But parents bring something equally important. We know our children. We see the changes that others may not notice. We carry their history, their habits, and their needs with us every moment of every single day. Speaking up did not mean I distrusted Lucas's doctors. It meant I was part of his medical team too. I had used my voice, and because I did, Lucas was able to receive a safer and more reliable way to breathe. We did not know exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt as though we were no longer waiting for the next emergency. We were moving towards hope. In the next chapter, Lucas undergoes surgery and begins breathing through his new tracheostomy. The procedure brings relief, but it also introduced an entirely new world of medical care, uncertainty, and responsibility. I'll see you in the next chapter.